Hi, and welcome to this explanation of how we can support early readers in their reading journey. If you're a parent of a child who's just starting out in school, I hope this will be helpful for you. If you're a parent of a child who's struggling with reading, you might find some strategies in here to try as well. Okay, the first thing I want to show you is a type of poster that I use that includes a lot of different reading strategies. I'm just going to cut to a picture of that now. Okay, so this is the poster, and you can see there's a number of strategies on there. We sort of work in order of sequence across in terms of complexity, and I wanted to show you some of the very early things that we use. I've got some old books here that have been retired from classroom use. Your child will probably bring home different books that are more modern from school, but the strategies that we're going to talk about will apply just as well in these old books as well. So this is a fairly simple reader. It's called Can You? And you can see straight away that these words at the beginning are fairly easy words. One of the things that your school will probably be doing is helping your child to develop a bank of words that they recognise by sight. So we call them sight words or high frequency words. Those words can be valuable tools to help children unlock those first books that they read. We don't want to build a dependence on sight words. We don't want children just recognising every single word from memory, because that will eventually reach its limits. So we do teach children how to decode words or break them down into their parts. But early on, having a few words that they recognise and can use fairly fluently and easily, like can, you, me, like, I, those kind of words, can help children very quickly get enough knowledge to decode some sentences. And that gives them confidence then to keep going, and it also allows them to have a basis upon which they can then try some other strategies. Okay, so let's assume that your child has learnt the words can you, and what we're going to look at now is the strategy of using the pictures. In the poster that I showed you, this would be eagle eyes, so using your eyes to help you. Can you? And then we get into this book, and we might say, get to this page here, what is this? It can, and we're not really sure, but the child might be able to use the picture of the creature hopping to help them work that out. Now, another thing that we can use, another strategy we can use here, is as children develop some alphabet knowledge and understand the phonics of our alphabet, so they recognise that some consonants represent certain sounds. For example, we often start with the letter S, S making a S sound. In that case, we might be able to use that knowledge to help us guess some words. So I'm just popping through this book, and the key words are hop, run, hide. So let's assume that a child then knows that the letter R makes the R sound. You might get to this page and they recognise they've practiced it, can, and they know that H makes that sound. We might use this strategy here, lips the fish, which is where we get our lips ready for the first sound in a word. And sometimes just being able to use that first sound with the child's knowledge of what would make sense in the context of the sentence or in the syntax of the sentence, along with what they can see in the pictures using their eagle eyes, that knowledge put together can be enough to help a child work out the meaning of a sentence. It can hop, it can, they might think about what that animal can do and come up with run, for example. I'm not saying this is the best book ever as an example, but you can see that idea, that it's fairly simple repetitive patterns. Now that's the other thing, is looking for that simple repetition, and then also reading books more than once, because that allows children then to experience the confidence that comes from reading a book accurately once they've worked really hard the first time. But it also gives them the ability to, for their brain to see and recognise words many times. And there's a bit of research around how many exposures your brain needs before it recognises things, and I've seen high teens into the 30s even for numbers of exposures, and it probably depends a little bit on your child's memory and focus when they're reading, and what parts of their brain are being activated and when they're reading and what they're remembering. But definitely, no matter how many times it takes, if we know that the more times a child reads, the greater the chance that they're going to retain that information, then every time we read a book that we've read before, we know that we're reinforcing those words. Now there's a balance there too, because some of those skills that we were working on in terms of getting a child to decode new words will only be practiced in a book that they haven't seen before, where they're decoding new words. So of course we want a balance. But if you're wondering why schools sometimes send home a book for an entire week, that will be why, because they want children to gain that repetition. At the same time, other schools might ask a child to change their book as often as possible, every night if they can. And if that's the case, while the books are still nice and short, you can definitely read one book a couple of times in a night and help your child to feel that confidence in that way. Okay, so those are two strategies we've talked about: using the pictures and looking at what they can see, and then using that first sound and getting their mouth ready to make that prediction. What we haven't talked about so far is that idea of sound it out, which was something that I was taught when I was a child, and it's a strategy that I get asked about a lot because a lot of parents are familiar with that strategy. And I guess we have to ask the question, do we still sound it out? Do we still sound words out? And the answer is, we do. We don't call it sounding out anymore, but we do stretch words into their parts. The thing is that sounding out doesn't always work. And so what we've come to recognize is that we can't have sounding it out being the go-to strategy all the time. So what we need to do is use a combination of strategies. And so we don't start with sounding out, partly because children don't have the phonetic knowledge yet when they first start school to know what all the sounds are, but also because we know in English that certain letter combinations don't sound the way they would if you sounded every letter out. And so we need to make sure children don't become dependent on a strategy which doesn't serve them well a lot of the time. So we'll start with words that do respond to that stretching out kind of strategy. Consonant, vowel, consonant words, for example, act. That put those sounds together. Once you've stretched it out, put them back together and that will work. For example, in this book, the word hop, op, would work. But we need to make sure that we are building on the strategies as we teach children certain knowledge, so they know their letter sounds, perhaps their short vowel sounds. Then we'll introduce books that have those rules in them, those kind of words in them, rather than pushing them too fast and too hard, where they get to words that don't work with that stretching out strategy, and that might be then that's the only strategy they've got, and they sort of get confused and give up. So we want to build those strategies and build the knowledge sort of corresponding to each other as they're going. So first of all, before they even learn any of their sounds, they might be able to learn some sight words and be using their eyes and their knowledge of our language to help them work out some words. Then once they've got some sight words and some sounds under their belt, they'll be able to read some books which use those sounds and look for that repetition. And then as that growing bank of knowledge comes in across the first couple of years of school, and they get a growing understanding of different phonics rules and spelling patterns, as they get those understandings, then they can apply them when they do stretch out words. And we might look for chunks in words, parts of words, or smaller words within bigger words and those sorts of things. And then that is the next more complex strategy that we might start to use towards the end of that first year of school. So let's just recap a few tips from this video. Firstly, we're going to look for books that are the right level for a child and nice and easy to start with. We're looking for them to be using the pictures to give them some clues, which is an important skill in terms of making meaning from the whole text. We can call that eagle eyes. We're also looking at making the first sound in the word once children start to get some understanding of the alphabet and the sounds that correspond to the letters. That's phonics. And once they start to build their bank of phonic knowledge, we can use that information to help children get the first sound of the word, and then eventually stretching words out into their parts a little bit more, making sure that most books don't have too many words outside the child's sphere of current knowledge of phonics. For example, if they know their consonant and their short vowel sounds, they can read short consonant vowel consonant words, but we might not have lots of long vowel sounds in the book yet because they might not know the rules which help us make long sounds like O. For example, the word rain has an A and an I. The child will need to know that A and I together make that A sound, or else they're going to say r-a-in or r-a-in if they recognise that chunk of the word in. Which brings me to an important point about sight words that we discussed, which is that it is important to build a bank of sight words and high frequency words for children to give them the confidence to read, but we don't want them to become too dependent on that. And we have to remember that children should be using a range of strategies and not just sound it out every time they read. We'll look at some other strategies in another video, but I hope if your child is just starting school now, that gives you a few ideas to help them in their home reading in the coming weeks. Thank you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notifications bell if you'd like to be notified when that next video does go up.